It was a quiet day at the edge of the repair station, where a human mechanic spent most of his time fixing ordinary ships. Life here was predictable, with the steady hum of engines and the occasional chatter of travelers passing through. But that day, something unusual caught his attention. A faint, irregular signal blinked on his scanner, different from the usual ship transmissions. It was weak, almost like a whisper, but persistent. Curiosity stirred inside him. Mechanic instincts told him to investigate. Ignoring it was not an option. He suited up, checking every tool and gadget he might need. The outer sector was risky ships sometimes drifted for months, abandoned and damaged beyond repair. He navigated carefully, using small thrusters to approach the source of the signal. As he came closer, a dark shape appeared against the backdrop of empty space. A ship, battered and silent, floated like a broken toy. Its hull was scarred, some panels missing, and the faint signal seemed to come from inside. No other life signs appeared on the scanners. It looked abandoned, but something about it felt different. The mechanic's gut told him there was more. To this ship than meets the eye. He docked carefully, securing his tether to the station. Inside, the corridors were dark, lit only by flickering emergency lights. Dust floated in the air, and the smell of burnt circuits lingered. The mechanic moved slowly, scanning every corner. Broken machinery and twisted metal were scattered everywhere. It looked like the ship had suffered some kind of violent attack, yet no bodies or signs of panic were visible. That was unusual. Most abandoned ships had clear damage from outside explosions, fire, smoke, but this one felt quiet, too quiet. Then he saw it. In a shadowed corner of the cargo hold lay something large, curled up and still. At first, he thought it was just a pile of broken supplies, but as he approached, he realized it was alive. His heart skipped a beat. The creature was unlike anything he had ever seen. Its body was scaled and long, shaped almost like a dragon from old human stories, but clearly alien. Its wings were folded and weak, and it did not move when he came close. Even more alarming, its body seemed paralyzed, unable to respond to his touch. Its eyes were closed, and every breath was shallow, making small, almost inaudible noises. The mechanic's mind raced. How could such a creature survive alone in this broken ship? How long had it been here? And why was it left behind? He crouched down, carefully examining the creature. Its skin shimmered faintly in the dim light, patterned with colors that shifted subtly. Its claws were delicate but strong, and tiny scars marked its body, evidence of past injuries. He realized that this dragon-like alien had been through a lot. The ship must have drifted for months, possibly more, and no one had returned to rescue it. The thought made him feel a deep sense of responsibility. He couldn't just leave it here to die. Not after all it had survived. He searched the ship for anything useful: food, water, or medical supplies. There were some small rations meant for alien species, maybe dropped for emergencies, but nothing enough to sustain a creature this size. Still, it was a start. He carefully fed the dragon small amounts, making sure not to scare it. At first, the creature barely reacted. Its eyes remained closed, its body tense and fragile. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, it shifted, trying to nuzzle the food. That tiny movement filled the mechanic with hope. If it could respond at all, it meant there was still a chance. He worked through the night, making the creature as comfortable as possible. He found a soft piece of old padding and gently placed it under its body, trying to support its paralyzed limbs. He cleaned its small wounds with careful precision, using antiseptics and tools from his kit. The dragon hissed faintly when he touched certain spots, but there was no aggression, only pain and fear. The mechanic spoke to it in a calm, gentle voice. I'm not going to hurt you. I'm here to help." It did not understand his words, of course, but somehow it seemed to sense his intentions. The creature's body relaxed slightly, a small but meaningful sign. The more he stayed, the more he noticed subtle things about it. Its breathing was irregular, but steady, and it responded to light touches on its head. Tiny muscles twitched when he moved near, as if it was testing him, testing if he could be trusted. He knew this was a delicate moment. If he made a wrong move, it could panic and injure itself. He decided that leaving it here overnight would be dangerous. He needed to bring it somewhere safe, a place where he could care for it properly. But how? The dragon was large and heavy, and his workshop was not designed for creatures like this. Still, the decision was clear. He could not abandon it. Not after finding it here. He had to try. The next morning, he began preparing. He fashioned a harness from available materials, soft enough not to hurt its skin, but strong enough to support its weight. He measured carefully, testing the balance to make sure the dragon would not slide or tip. He spoke to it softly, encouraging it with his tone rather than words. "We're going to get you out of here. You'll be safe." The creature's eyes fluttered open for the first time, faintly, and it looked at him with a mixture of fear and curiosity. That small gaze, filled with vulnerability and trust, struck the mechanic deeply. He understood then that this was not just a task, it was a responsibility. Maybe even a connection he could not ignore. As he lifted it, carefully adjusting the harness, he realized how fragile the creature really was. Every movement had to be slow, deliberate. One wrong step could make its injuries worse. His hands were steady but firm, and he whispered reassurances. The dragon made soft sounds, almost like a sigh, and rested its head on his shoulder. For a moment, the mechanic felt a strange warmth in his chest. It was unusual, unexpected, a bond forming between human and alien. Not a friendship yet, but something approaching it. He knew that getting it to his workshop safely was only the beginning. The real challenge, helping it heal, was just ahead. As they moved through the empty corridors and back toward the repair station, the mechanic kept glancing down, checking for signs of discomfort. The dragon's body was still rigid, and he noticed faint twitching in its tail and wings. It was alive, but barely. That realization made him even more determined. Months of isolation had not broken its spirit completely. Somehow, it had survived against odds he could hardly imagine. And now, it had a chance, because a human decided to act when everyone else ignored it. He felt a quiet pride, but also an immense responsibility. Saving a life, especially one so extraordinary, was not something to take lightly. When they finally reached the mechanic's workshop, he carefully laid the dragon on a makeshift bed. It looked around cautiously, testing its surroundings. The room was small but warm, filled with tools and machines, but free of danger. He gave it water and a small amount of food, watching every movement. The dragon responded with slight gestures, nodding its head, blinking, twitching its tail. For the first time, he saw signs of recognition, maybe even relief. The mechanic smiled, exhausted but satisfied. This was just the beginning of a long journey, but for now, the dragon was safe, and that was enough. He cleaned up the area, making it comfortable and secure, and then sat beside it, observing quietly. He knew that tomorrow, and the days after, would be full of challenges. Feeding, caring, and helping it regain strength would not be easy. But as he looked at the creature's fragile body, he also saw hope. Hope that it could heal, hope that trust could grow, and hope that he had done the right thing by stepping in when no one else did. This broken alien dragon, left alone for months on a damaged ship, had found a lifeline in a human mechanic. And in that moment, both of them began a journey neither could have imagined, a journey of care, trust, and the slow, steady work of saving a life against all odds. The morning after bringing the dragon into his workshop, the mechanic woke to the quiet sound of soft breathing. The creature had moved slightly during the night, curling one wing around itself and shifting its head toward the dim light. Seeing this small movement filled him with hope. He quietly prepared his breakfast, careful not to disturb it. Even the smallest sound could startle the dragon, and he wanted it to feel safe. The workshop, once just a place of tools and machines, now felt like a shared space where trust had to grow slowly, day by day. He approached the dragon cautiously, kneeling beside it. "Good morning," he whispered. He didn't know if it understood his words, but the tone mattered. The dragon's eyes opened slowly, revealing colors that seemed to shift depending on the light, a mesmerizing swirl of blues and greens. For a moment, they stared at each other in silence. It was a strange connection. Different species, different worlds, but in that moment, there was understanding. Neither spoke, yet both knew something important had passed between them. Feeding. The dragon was a delicate process. Its body was still weak, and even small amounts of food had to be given carefully. The mechanic had researched what might be safe, mixing a blend of nutrients he thought would help it regain strength. At first, the dragon hesitated, sniffing the food, unsure if it could trust him. He extended it slowly, keeping his hand steady. After a long pause, it leaned forward and took a small bite. Relief flooded him. This was progress, tiny but significant. Over the next hours, he fed it in this careful manner, noting which foods it preferred and how it reacted to touch. After feeding, he began assessing its injuries more closely. Some muscles had atrophied from months of inactivity, and its limbs were stiff. Even gentle movements caused discomfort, which meant he had to be extremely careful. He used soft cloths and warm compresses to improve blood flow, speaking softly all the while. Every twitch or small movement the dragon made felt like a victory. He realized that healing wasn't just about food or medicine, it was about trust. The dragon had been abandoned once, and the mechanic could sense its fear. Every step forward would depend on patience, gentleness, and consistency. Days passed in this rhythm. Morning feeding, gentle exercises, and long hours of quiet observation. Slowly, the dragon began to respond to his presence. It moved its head to follow him, twitched a wing in curiosity, and even nuzzled his hand once. That tiny gesture brought a smile to the mechanic's face. It was more than a sign of health. It was a sign of trust, a bridge being built between two very different lives. For him, the work was exhausting, but each small breakthrough renewed his energy. He began sleeping in short shifts, always nearby in case the dragon needed him, knowing it relied on him completely. He also experimented with ways to help it move safely. Using scraps of old machinery, he crafted a soft, supportive harness that allowed the dragon to attempt small stretches without risking further injury. It took multiple tries to get the fit right, and the dragon occasionally hissed or resisted, startled by the new experience. But the mechanic never forced it. Instead, he allowed the creature to experiment at its own pace, praising it softly for every successful movement. Watching the first slight lift of its wings was exhilarating. The dragon seemed surprised as well, as if it had forgotten it could even move. They celebrated that small success together, in silence, both aware of the significance of the moment. The mechanic soon realized that care was not just physical. The dragon needed mental and emotional attention too. Alone for months, it had no interaction, no reassurance that the world could be safe. He spoke to it gently, telling stories about ordinary life, about repairing ships, about the small joys he found in his work. He demonstrated simple tasks with his hands, showing tools, explaining machines in a soft voice. It was as though he was teaching it to reconnect with the world, not just heal its body, but heal its confidence. Gradually, the dragon started watching him with more interest, tilting its head, following his movements, and even making small, curious sounds. One evening, as the sun's rays of the station's artificial light bathed the workshop, the dragon attempted to lift its head fully for the first time without support. It faltered, falling gently back onto the padding, but the effort was significant. The mechanic leaned close, encouraging it softly. "You're doing well. Keep trying." Over time, these small efforts became more frequent. The dragon began stretching its wings, pushing itself forward slightly, and even experimenting with movements that seemed playful. There were moments of frustration when it stumbled, but the mechanic was patient, never scolding or showing irritation. He understood that this was a creature recovering not only from injury, but from the fear of abandonment. As trust grew, so did their bond. The dragon began to recognize patterns: the mechanic's footsteps, the sound of his voice, even the smell of his clothes. It started to respond to gestures, leaning toward him when it wanted food or attention. The mechanic noticed subtle expressions in its eyes: curiosity, hesitation, and eventually what seemed like affection. Each of these moments was a breakthrough. Caring for this alien dragon became more than a responsibility. It became a shared journey. Each day brought new lessons about patience, resilience, and the quiet power of trust. During one particularly quiet morning, the mechanic decided to attempt a new exercise. Using the harness and gentle pulleys, he supported the dragon's body and allowed it to attempt standing on its own. The dragon was unsure at first, its legs wobbling as if they had forgotten their purpose. But after several attempts, it lifted itself fully for a few seconds. Its body trembled with the effort, but it was standing, an incredible achievement after months of paralysis. The mechanic couldn't hide his excitement, smiling broadly and clapping softly. The dragon blinked at him, perhaps surprised by his reaction, and let out a small, almost triumphant sound. That moment marked a turning point. Recovery was slow, but it was real. The days continued in this rhythm. The mechanic adjusted the diet, improved the exercises, and watched closely for any signs of discomfort or injury. He also worked on the dragon's environment, creating more space and safer surfaces for it to explore. Sometimes the dragon hesitated, retreating to a corner or curling up in fear, but he never forced it. He learned to read its subtle movements, understanding when to encourage and when to step back. The dragon's responses became more complex: tail flicks, head tilts, and soft vocalizations, each signaling progress and understanding. The mechanic also began noticing emotional changes. Where the dragon had once seemed hopeless and frightened, there was now a spark of curiosity, a glimmer of confidence. It would watch him work with interest, sometimes following him across the workshop. Occasionally, it tried to mimic small actions, nudging objects with its claws or moving in ways that seemed playful. These moments brought joy to the mechanic, reinforcing the idea that recovery was more than physical. It was emotional and mental as well. The dragon, once abandoned and paralyzed, was beginning to experience hope again. By the end of the second month, the dragon's progress was undeniable. It could lift its head fully, stretch its wings slightly, and even support part of its weight on its legs. It responded to the mechanic's voice, seeking reassurance and attention. The bond between them had strengthened, built on patience, care, and mutual trust. The mechanic often paused to watch it sleep, marveling at the resilience of a creature that had survived alone for so long. He knew the real challenge was still ahead, but the foundation of their relationship was solid. They were no longer just mechanic and alien dragon. They were companions in recovery, sharing a journey that neither had expected. As he cleaned up the workshop each evening, The mechanic reflected on how much had changed. A quiet, lonely space was now alive with movement. And life. The dragon, once fragile and abandoned, had found a safe place, and in return, it offered something unexpected: companionship, trust, and even small moments of joy. The mechanic felt a sense of purpose, deeper than anything he had known before. Caring for this creature was exhausting, demanding, and sometimes frustrating, but it was also profoundly rewarding. He knew that tomorrow would bring more challenges, more careful feeding, more exercises, and more lessons in patience. But for the first time in months, both he and the dragon could feel progress. They were no longer alone, no longer abandoned, and no longer hopeless. And so, day by day, meal by meal, movement by movement, the mechanic and the dragon began a journey of healing. It was a slow, delicate process, full of tiny victories and careful attention. Every effort mattered. Every gesture of trust counted. The dragon's small successes inspired the mechanic, while his steady presence reassured the creature that it was safe. Together, they began to rewrite the story of survival, replacing abandonment with care, paralysis with hope, and fear with trust. The journey had just begun, but the foundation was strong, and the bond they were building promised a future neither had dared to imagine before. The days turned into weeks, and the mechanic quickly realized that helping the dragon recover would be far more difficult than he had imagined. Carrying it, feeding it, and caring for its injuries was one thing, but now came the true challenge. Helping a creature that had been paralyzed for months learn how to move again. Every muscle in its body had weakened, and its wings, once meant for flying, were now fragile and stiff. The mechanic knew this process would take patience, creativity, and a constant willingness to adapt. There would be no shortcuts. Each morning began with a careful check of the dragon's condition. He would gently lift its wings and legs, feeling for stiffness or resistance, noting which muscles needed more support. Some days, the dragon would be restless, its eyes wide with fear or frustration, and it would resist even the gentlest movements. The mechanic learned to read these signals, understanding when to push and when to step back. Progress could be slow, and setbacks were common. One small fall could set the creature back hours, or even days, but he refused to be discouraged. He reminded himself that healing was a journey, not a race. To help the dragon strengthen its body, he built simple exercise equipment from the scraps and tools in his workshop. Using soft harnesses, pulleys, and ropes, he created a system where the dragon could practice lifting itself gradually. He tied supports under its wings to allow small stretches, and under its legs to encourage stepping motions. It was clumsy at first. The dragon would flail, wobble, or even panic, but the mechanic never forced it. He would pause, speaking softly, offering calm reassurance until it trusted him again. Over time, the dragon began to respond, moving with more control, discovering strength it had forgotten it possessed. Feeding was also part of the process. The dragon needed enough energy to regain muscle, but it had to be given carefully. The mechanic experimented with a mix of alien rations and carefully prepared nutrients, ensuring they were gentle on its system. Each feeding was a test of trust. Sometimes it would refuse food until he showed patience and gentle persistence. Other times it would eat eagerly, signaling a small victory in its recovery. He learned to celebrate every tiny success, the first sip of water without spilling, the first small step taken with support, the first attempt to lift its head fully without assistance. Each of these moments was precious, but the journey was not just physical. The dragon had spent months abandoned, alone in a broken ship, and it carried the weight of that fear. Some nights it would wake in panic, shivering and confused. The mechanic would sit beside it, speaking softly, gently stroking its scales where it allowed. Sometimes he would place a warm hand under its head, offering comfort. Slowly, over many nights, the dragon began to calm down, trusting his presence even when it could not move. Emotional healing was just as important as physical healing. The mechanic understood that a scared, anxious creature would never regain strength unless it felt safe. There were difficult days when progress seemed impossible. The dragon would fall repeatedly during exercises, or its wings would refuse to lift. The mechanic felt the frustration too, but he never let it show. Instead, he would take a step back, rethinking his methods, adjusting the harness, or giving the creature more rest. He realized that forcing movement could do more harm than good. Recovery required patience, observation, and empathy. It was a test of endurance for both of them. Each small improvement, however, gave hope. The dragon's tail would twitch in recognition of his voice. Its eyes would follow his movements, and sometimes it would even reach a claw toward him. These moments reminded him why he had chosen to help in the first place. The workshop itself had transformed during this time. Where it had once been a place of machines and tools, it was now a space designed for rehabilitation. Soft mats covered the floors. Support structures were built to allow safe movement, and there were areas for feeding, resting, and gentle exercises. Every object had a purpose in aiding the dragon's recovery. The mechanic worked tirelessly, often skipping meals or rest to attend to the creature's needs. He barely noticed the passing of time. His world had shrunk to the rhythm of the dragon's recovery, and yet he felt fulfilled. For the first time, he was part of something bigger than himself, saving a life and witnessing a transformation that few could imagine. One breakthrough came unexpectedly. During a morning exercise, the dragon attempted to stand without full support. Its legs wobbled dangerously, and it fell onto the padded floor, making a soft, frustrated sound. But then it tried again, leaning against the harness for balance. Slowly, inch by inch, it lifted itself onto its legs, shaking with effort but standing. The mechanic held his breath, quietly encouraging it. The dragon held its stance for a few moments before falling, exhausted but triumphant. That single act of effort, repeated many times over days, marked the turning point. The creature was learning to trust its own strength, and the mechanic's dedication was finally paying off. Beyond exercises, he also focused on building confidence. The dragon needed to believe it could move without constant support. The mechanic encouraged exploration, placing small objects for it to investigate, gently coaxing it to take steps toward them. Some days it refused, lying still for hours. Other days it would slowly crawl, stretch a wing, or lift its head. Every small movement was celebrated quietly, a shared victory between human and alien. Over time, the dragon began to understand that it could survive, could regain strength, and that the mechanic's presence was not a threat, but a source of help and comfort. The emotional bond deepened further as the dragon began recognizing patterns in the mechanic's behavior. It would follow his movements with its eyes, react to his voice, and even begin to anticipate feeding times. When he entered the room, it would lift its head slightly, a subtle but meaningful gesture. The mechanic noticed these small signs, feeling a growing sense of connection. It was as if the dragon had become aware not only of his presence, but of his care, and in return, it offered trust. This connection strengthened both of them. The mechanic felt a profound sense of purpose, and the dragon, once abandoned and weak, began to feel the comfort of companionship. Weeks turned into months, and the dragon's progress became more visible. Its wings began to stretch more confidently, its legs carried more weight, and its body responded to gentle exercises with less fear. The mechanic adapted continuously, inventing new exercises and refining old ones, always careful to match the dragon's pace. Sometimes he would sit beside it, letting it rest while he watched its breathing, noting subtle improvements in muscle tone and movement. Recovery was slow, but steady. Every twitch, every step, every lift of the head was a reminder of resilience, determination, and the power of trust. Evenings were quieter, but no less important. The mechanic would sit beside the dragon, offering comfort and companionship. Sometimes he would talk about the day, telling stories about the repair station, about tools, and about small, ordinary things. The dragon listened, or at least it appeared to, tilting its head or letting out soft sounds. Those moments of calm intimacy reinforced their bond. Healing was not just physical, it was emotional, mental, and relational. The mechanic understood that building confidence and trust was essential for full recovery. Without it, the dragon could never move freely or feel safe. By the end of part 3 of their journey, it was clear that transformation was underway. The dragon could now support its weight, stretch its wings partially, and even attempt a few steps with the harness. The mechanic marveled at each milestone, realizing how far they had come together. They were no longer just caretaker and injured creature. They were companions, working together to overcome fear, weakness, and abandonment. The workshop had become a sanctuary of healing, a place where patience, dedication, and trust had created hope from despair. The journey was far from over, but the mechanic knew that the dragon's recovery was now inevitable. With continued care, exercises, and emotional support, the creature would continue to regain strength. And the bond they had built, forged in months of patient effort and shared challenges, would remain unbreakable. The dragon, once left to drift alone in a broken ship, was now learning to move again, learning to trust, and learning that life could be safe and meaningful. The mechanic, once a simple repairman, had become a lifeline, a teacher, and a friend. Together, they had begun a journey that would change both of their lives forever. As the days passed, the mechanic began to notice more about the dragon's behavior, patterns that hinted at its history and personality. While it was still paralyzed when he first found it, now it moved with more purpose, exploring its surroundings. Cautiously, its eyes, once fearful and uncertain, began to reflect curiosity and intelligence. The mechanic realized that this creature had a story, a past that he could only begin to understand through observation and patience. He started paying close attention to the dragon's reactions to the workshop and to himself. When he brought food, it didn't just eat, it sniffed, touched, and sometimes nudged him gently, as though asking questions he couldn't answer. When he adjusted the harness or helped it stretch its wings, it seemed to respond with recognition, remembering the safe touch that helped it survive. The mechanic began to notice small, deliberate gestures, movements that suggested thought rather than instinct. He realized the dragon was intelligent, much more than he had first imagined. It wasn't just a wounded animal. It was a sentient being, capable of understanding, learning, and remembering. Through small signs, the dragon also revealed fragments of its past. Its wings bore old scars, marks of battles or accidents. Its body showed signs of malnourishment, hinting that it had survived for months with minimal care. The mechanic speculated that the dragon had once belonged to a crew or community that valued it, but something had gone wrong. Maybe a crash or attack left it stranded. Its behavior sometimes hinted at sorrow or loss, a hesitation in movement that seemed to reflect more than physical weakness. The mechanic felt a growing sense of responsibility, not just to heal its body, but to understand its emotional wounds. Communication became an essential part of their growing relationship. The dragon could not speak in human language, of course, but it tried to express itself in other ways. It drew simple shapes in the dirt of the workshop with its claws, tapped objects to indicate interest, and used soft vocalizations that varied with emotion. The mechanic began to interpret these signs, learning to recognize when the dragon was hungry, tired, or curious. He responded with gestures, soft words, and consistent actions, creating a system of mutual understanding. Over time, the dragon began to anticipate his responses, showing that it remembered and learned from each interaction. The mechanic also learned that the dragon had a deep sense of memory. It seemed to recall even the smallest details from its past objects it had touched, routes it had explored, and even small gestures from the mechanic himself. Sometimes it would pause mid-movement, looking toward the corner of the workshop, where he had first found it, or toward tools and scraps that reminded it of its abandoned ship. The mechanic realized that the dragon's past, filled with fear and uncertainty, shaped its current behavior. Healing would require more than physical exercise. It would require patience, trust, and empathy. He resolved to provide all three, knowing that emotional recovery was just as important as physical recovery. The bond between them grew stronger each day. The dragon began seeking the mechanic's presence, curling closer when he was nearby and leaning into gentle touches. It followed his movements, watched him work, and seemed to understand that he was the source of safety and support. The mechanic responded with consistent care, keeping routines predictable and safe. Feeding, exercise, rest, and comfort became a rhythm they shared, building trust in a way that transcended words. It was as if the dragon recognized him not only as a caretaker, but as a companion, someone whose presence was steady and reliable in a world that had once been chaotic and frightening. One quiet afternoon, the mechanic noticed something remarkable. The dragon, for the first time, began to mimic his movements in small ways. When he stretched his arms, it stretched its wings. When he adjusted a tool, it touched a nearby object in imitation. These small gestures were not just curiosity. They were signs of recognition and engagement, a willingness to interact and learn. The mechanic felt a surge of pride and wonder. Here was a creature that had survived abandonment, trauma, and paralysis, now engaging with him in a way that suggested not only intelligence, but a willingness to bond. The mechanic began experimenting with more advanced forms of interaction. He introduced small puzzles and tasks to challenge the dragon's mind and body. He placed objects at a slight distance, encouraging it to stretch, reach, or move deliberately. Sometimes he hid food under light covers, prompting the dragon to problem solve and think creatively. At first, the dragon was hesitant, cautious of unfamiliar challenges. But over time, it became more confident, moving with purpose and curiosity. The exercises were not just physical, they were mental, teaching the dragon that it could adapt, learn, and even enjoy the process of discovery got through this process. The mechanic began to understand the dragon's emotional depth. It displayed signs of joy when it succeeded at a task, frustration when it failed, and curiosity when something new was introduced. Its eyes and posture conveyed subtle emotions, tentative hope, cautious excitement, and moments of quiet pride. The mechanic learned to respond to these emotions, offering reassurance when needed and encouragement when progress was made. This emotional dialogue, though nonverbal, became as important as any feeding or exercise routine. Healing, he realized, required not only strength, but confidence, trust, and emotional security. As the weeks continued, the dragon's curiosity about the mechanic grew. It began observing him more closely, following his work, and even attempting to anticipate his actions. It seemed fascinated by the tools, machines, and small inventions scattered around the workshop. Sometimes it would nudge a device or object, exploring with its claws, and the mechanic would explain gently, showing how it worked or how it could be handled safely. These moments became lessons, teaching the dragon not only about the world around it, but about cooperation and trust. It was learning that it could navigate its environment safely, guided by the mechanic's presence. The mechanic also discovered more about the dragon's resilience. Despite months of abandonment and paralysis, it showed remarkable determination to regain movement and interact with the world. Every attempt to stretch, every small step, every engagement with new objects was a testament to its willpower. The mechanic marveled at this, realizing that even in its weakest moments, the dragon had never completely given up. It had survived alone for months, relying on instinct and resilience. Now, with guidance and care, it could begin to reclaim not only strength, but confidence and independence. One evening, as the workshop lights dimmed, the mechanic reflected on the dragon's journey so far. It had come a long way since the day he first found it on the broken ship. Its body was stronger, its movements more deliberate, and its mind more alert. But more importantly, it had begun to heal emotionally. Fear was gradually replaced by trust, and hesitation by curiosity. The bond they had formed was profound, a quiet, steady connection built on patience, care, and mutual understanding. The mechanic felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that his efforts had not only saved a life, but had restored hope and confidence to a creature that had once been abandoned. He knew, however, that the journey was far from complete. The dragon still had limitations. Its wings were not yet strong enough to fly. Its legs still required support, and its confidence in moving freely was fragile. Emotional scars from abandonment remained, visible in its cautious movements and hesitant reactions to new challenges. The mechanic understood that recovery would continue to require patience, dedication, and empathy. But he also knew that the foundation had been laid. Trust had been established. Progress was visible, and the dragon was beginning to embrace the possibilities of life again. The mechanic also reflected on what he had learned from the dragon. Caring for it had challenged him in ways he had never anticipated. It required not just skill and knowledge, but empathy, observation, and emotional intelligence. He had to slow down, notice details, and respond with patience. He had to learn to communicate without words and understand signals that were subtle and complex. In return, the dragon had taught him resilience, determination, and the quiet power of trust. Their journey was mutual. He was as changed by it as the dragon was by his care. By the end of Part 4, the relationship between human and dragon had grown into something profound. The dragon was stronger, more aware, and emotionally responsive. It sought interaction, engaged with its surroundings, and showed signs of curiosity and intelligence that had been hidden under months of fear and paralysis. The mechanic had not only healed its body, but nurtured its mind and spirit, creating a foundation for full recovery. They were no longer just caretaker and creature, they were companions, bonded through shared struggle, patience, and understanding. The dragon's past, though still a mystery in many ways, had become a part of their shared journey. Its experiences of abandonment and fear informed how they moved forward, shaping the care, routines, and emotional support the mechanic provided. And in return, the dragon offered something priceless: trust, engagement, and the beginnings of a unique companionship. Together, they were slowly rewriting the story of its life, from abandoned and paralyzed on a broken ship to a creature learning to move, think, and trust again. The path ahead was still long. Physical recovery, emotional. Months of careful care and patience had finally begun to show remarkable results. The dragon, once paralyzed and terrified, was now stronger and more confident. Its wings, which had been weak and unsteady, were now able to stretch with more control, and its legs could support its weight for longer periods. Every day, the mechanic watched it explore the workshop in small steps, testing its strength and gaining confidence bit by bit. Each movement was a victory, and each small achievement brought a sense of pride that was difficult to describe. Even the smallest milestones felt significant. The first time the dragon lifted its head fully without support, the mechanic had felt exhilarated. The first time it took several steps, wobbling but determined, was even more thrilling. Now, as he watched it stretch its wings and crawl toward him, he realized that those moments had been building toward this day, a day where progress became tangible and inspiring. The dragon's determination to recover reminded him that resilience was not about strength alone. It was about patience, persistence, and a willingness to keep trying even when failure seemed inevitable. The mechanic continued to refine their routines. He created more advanced exercises to strengthen the dragon's muscles. Using pulleys and soft supports, he encouraged it to lift its body and stretch its wings in longer motions. Sometimes he guided it through gentle walking exercises, supporting its weight but allowing it to use its legs independently. At first, these exercises were slow and tentative. The dragon would stumble, fall, or flail its wings in fear. But each time, the mechanic patiently helped it regain balance, speaking softly and reassuringly. Slowly, the creature began to gain confidence. Its movements became more deliberate and coordinated, and the hesitancy that had plagued it for months started to fade. Feeding and care remained an essential part of the process. The dragon's body was still recovering from months of neglect, so nutrition had to be precise. The mechanic carefully monitored its diet, adjusting portions and nutrients to ensure it had enough energy to build muscle without overexertion. Meal times became opportunities for connection. The dragon would approach him eagerly, recognizing that he was the source of safety and nourishment. Sometimes it would nuzzle his hand or gently tap him with a claw, small gestures that conveyed gratitude and trust. Each interaction, no matter how minor, reinforced the bond they had formed over months of shared struggle. One day, the mechanic introduced a new challenge. He placed a small obstacle course in the workshop, using soft mats, low ramps, and gentle slopes. The goal was to encourage the dragon to move more independently, test its balance, and strengthen its coordination. At first, the creature hesitated, eyeing the course with uncertainty. It had learned to trust him, but new challenges were still intimidating. The mechanic stayed close, speaking calmly, demonstrating the path with his hands, and encouraging it step by step. Slowly, the dragon began to navigate the obstacles, moving cautiously but steadily. Each successful traversal brought a soft, almost triumphant vocalization, a sound that the mechanic came to recognize as pride and accomplishment. As the dragon's mobility improved, its confidence grew. It began exploring areas of the workshop it had previously avoided, testing its wings, walking longer distances, and even attempting short hops. Each attempt was met with gentle encouragement, guidance, and support. The mechanic realized that healing was no longer only about strength. It was about independence and self-belief. The dragon had to learn to trust its own body and abilities, and he had to resist the urge to intervene too quickly. Allowing it to explore, stumble, and succeed on its own was a vital part of the process. Alongside physical recovery, emotional healing continued. The dragon, once fearful and withdrawn, now sought interaction with the mechanic. It would follow him around the workshop, nuzzle his hands, and make soft sounds of recognition. Occasionally, it would tilt its head, blinking in curiosity as he demonstrated tools or tasks. The mechanic encouraged these interactions, knowing that emotional confidence was inseparable from physical recovery. The dragon had spent months in isolation, and learning to trust, communicate, and engage with another being was as crucial as rebuilding muscle strength. There were moments of frustration, of course. Some days, the dragon would resist exercises, retreat to a corner, or refuse food. These setbacks tested the mechanic's patience, reminding him that recovery was not linear. But he understood the importance of consistency, empathy, and gentle encouragement. Instead of forcing it, he would pause, offer comfort, and allow the creature to regain composure. Often, after a short rest, the dragon would return to its exercises with renewed determination. These moments reinforced the principle that trust and patience are just as important as any physical technique. One particularly significant day came when the dragon managed to lift its entire body onto all fours and take several confident steps. Without support, its wings fluttered in excitement, and it let out a clear, joyful vocalization. The mechanic's heart swelled with pride. Months of care, observation, and effort had culminated in this moment. He knelt beside the creature, offering a soft hand in praise, and it nudged him gently with its head, a gesture of connection and acknowledgement. This success was more than physical progress. It was evidence of the dragon's growing confidence, resilience, and trust in him. As recovery progressed, the mechanic also introduced subtle mental challenges. The dragon was intelligent and curious, and simple physical exercises were not enough to keep it engaged. He created tasks that encouraged problem-solving, observation, and decision-making. Sometimes he hid treats or small objects in safe locations, prompting the dragon to think, explore, and use its growing strength. At first, it struggled, hesitating or making mistakes. But over time, it learned to approach challenges deliberately, testing possibilities and finding solutions. Each success reinforced not only its cognitive abilities, but also its growing confidence in movement and interaction. The bond between human and dragon deepened with each passing day. They communicated through gestures, soft vocalizations, and shared routines. The dragon seemed to understand that the mechanic's presence meant safety, guidance, and care. It began seeking his attention, responding to his movements and displaying subtle signs of affection, resting its head near him, nudging his hand, or curling closer during rest. These interactions were quiet but profound, signaling a partnership built on trust and mutual respect. For the mechanic, these moments were as rewarding as any physical milestone. As weeks turned into months, the dragon's strength continued to grow. It could now walk across the workshop with confidence, lift its wings fully, and even attempt controlled leaps. The mechanic monitored its progress meticulously, adjusting exercises, ensuring safe environments, and providing consistent encouragement. Recovery was no longer a fragile process. It had become a dynamic journey, with the dragon actively participating in its own healing. The sense of accomplishment and pride was shared between them, forming a bond that went beyond caretaker and creature. Evenings became moments of quiet reflection. The mechanic would sit beside the dragon, observing its breathing, listening to its soft vocalizations, and noting subtle changes in posture or expression. These quiet moments reinforced the trust and connection they had built. The dragon had learned to rely on him, and in turn, he had learned to trust in its growing abilities, resilience, and intelligence. The emotional aspect of recovery was now intertwined with the physical, creating a holistic sense of progress that was both visible and deeply felt. By the end of this phase, it was clear that the dragon was approaching full recovery. Its muscles were stronger, its wings more controlled, and its confidence in movement increasingly evident. It explored the workshop freely, responded to the mechanic's presence with curiosity and affection, and engaged in both physical and mental challenges with determination. The long, slow journey of healing, built on patience, empathy, and consistent care, had transformed the creature. From a fragile, paralyzed being left abandoned on her broken ship, it had become a vibrant, curious, and confident creature capable of independent movement. The mechanic reflected on the journey so far. The dragon's recovery was a testament to perseverance, trust, and the quiet power of care. Months of effort, observation, and gentle guidance had reshaped not only the creature's body, but also its mind and spirit. Each challenge, setback, and small success had contributed to a transformation that went beyond physical healing. They had forged a bond rooted in patience, understanding, and mutual respect, an unspoken connection that neither would forget. Dragon, once abandoned and paralyzed, had begun to reclaim its life, movement, and confidence. The mechanic, once a simple caretaker, had become a teacher, companion, and friend. Together, they had created a sanctuary of trust, resilience, and growth, proving that even in the harshest circumstances, life could be restored with patience, care, and dedication. Months of care, patience, and dedication had finally brought them to a turning point. The dragon, once paralyzed and terrified, had grown stronger, more confident, and curious about the world around it. Its wings were no longer fragile. Its legs supported its full weight, and its eyes reflected a sharp intelligence and a quiet joy. The mechanic could watch it stretch, move, and explore, and for the first time, he felt that the creature might soon be ready for a life beyond the workshop. Even now, there was a sense of cautious excitement. The dragon would walk around the workshop freely, testing surfaces, climbing over low platforms, and occasionally hopping in short bursts. Its movements were deliberate, measured, and graceful. The mechanic observed closely, ready to intervene if necessary, but increasingly, he saw the dragon asserting its independence. It was no longer a creature defined by injury or abandonment. It was reclaiming its own life, learning that it could move, trust, and exist without fear. Their daily routines continued, but now they were less about survival and more about refinement. The mechanic introduced new exercises to test balance, coordination, and flight readiness. Soft ramps and platforms encouraged the dragon to jump, stretch, and flex its wings. Initially, these exercises were tentative, but the dragon grew bolder each day. Its movements became smoother, more confident, and sometimes even playful. Occasionally, it would nudge the mechanic with a wing or tail, as if inviting interaction or approval. The workshop, once a place of recovery, had become a space for exploration, discovery, and the final stages of preparation for the world outside. Feeding, though simpler now, remained a bonding ritual. The dragon would approach calmly, accepting food without hesitation, often making soft sounds of recognition as the mechanic offered it. These moments were intimate and comforting, a quiet acknowledgement of trust and connection. Over the months, the creature had learned to depend on him, and he had learned to read its signals and respect its autonomy. Feeding was no longer just about nourishment. It was about companionship, the reinforcement of trust, and the subtle communication of care and respect. One day, the mechanic noticed a small but remarkable shift. The dragon, which had once feared movement, now attempted to lift itself higher into the air, flapping its wings with controlled power. It didn't soar immediately. It wasn't yet ready for full flight, but the attempt was precise and deliberate. The dragon seemed aware of its growing strength, testing limits and gaining confidence. The mechanic's heart swelled. All the months of care, gentle encouragement, and consistent attention had culminated in this moment. The dragon was ready to reclaim not only movement, but the freedom it had lost for so long. The emotional bond between them was now undeniable. The dragon often sought the mechanic's presence, curling near him during rest, following his movements, and responding to his voice with clear recognition. There were subtle gestures that spoke volumes, a nudge of the head, a flick of the tail, a soft vocalization. These interactions were no longer timid or hesitant. They reflected trust, affection, and a sense of shared life. The mechanic understood that this bond had been forged through months of patience, care, and mutual dependence. It was a connection that transcended words, species, and circumstance, encouraging independence became the focus of the next stage of recovery. The mechanic allowed the dragon to explore larger spaces within the station, observing its movements carefully. Initially, the creature hesitated, unsure of what lay beyond the familiar workshop. But over time, curiosity overcame fear. It tested surfaces, climbed small inclines, and even attempted controlled leaps. Each successful movement was met with gentle encouragement, and the dragon seemed to respond, as if acknowledging its own progress. The mechanic realized that recovery was no longer about guidance alone. It was about enabling the dragon to trust itself. As the dragon's confidence grew, so did its sense of playfulness. It began experimenting with movements, flapping its wings higher, hopping more energetically, and even interacting with objects in a curious, almost joyful way. Occasionally, it would engage the mechanic in these playful experiments, nudging him, mimicking his gestures, or responding to soft encouragement. These moments were rewarding in a way that went beyond physical recovery. They reflected emotional, healing, intelligence, and the blossoming of a personality that had been hidden under fear and paralysis for months. The mechanic also worked to strengthen the dragon's flying ability. Using soft harnesses and careful support, he encouraged the creature to lift its body and flap its wings repeatedly. At first, the movements were short and uncertain, but with consistent practice, the dragon began to rise higher, maintain balance, and coordinate its wings with its body. Each day, it became more capable, and each small flight attempt brought a sense of triumph. The mechanic would cheer softly, reaching out a hand in reassurance, and the dragon seemed to respond with recognition and pride. Emotional healing continued alongside physical progress. The dragon had spent months alone, and frightened, and scars of that abandonment remained. But now it sought companionship, comfort, and interaction. It would rest near the mechanic, follow his movements, and respond to his voice with clear recognition. Occasionally, he would express subtle signs of excitement or joy, flicks of the tail, soft vocalizations, or gentle nudges. The mechanic understood that these gestures reflected not only emotional recovery, but also the deep trust they had built together. This bond had become the foundation for the dragon's independence, resilience, and eventual freedom. The final days in the HFY workshop were filled with moments of anticipation. The dragon had regained full mobility, strength, and confidence. Its wings were powerful, its legs steady, and its curiosity boundless. It had learned to navigate obstacles, explore new surfaces, and even test its wings in controlled flights. The mechanic watched closely, ensuring safety, but increasingly stepping back to allow independence. He realized that the creature was ready for life beyond the workshop, that the journey of recovery, care, and trust had prepared it for freedom. Then came the day when the dragon made its first sustained flight. The mechanic had guided it to the top of a small platform, ensuring that the surrounding space was safe. The creature paused, stretching its wings fully, testing its strength. With a powerful leap, it lifted into the air, flapping steadily, balancing its body, and gliding across the room with control and grace. The mechanic felt a rush of emotion, pride, relief, joy. The dragon had not only regained physical ability, but had embraced its freedom. Its trust in him remained, but it had also learned to trust itself, completing a journey that began in fear, abandonment, and paralysis. After the flight, the dragon landed smoothly, approaching the mechanic with what seemed like a gesture of gratitude. It nudged him gently with its head, curled near him, and let out soft, contented sounds. For the first time, there was a sense of completion in their journey. The dragon had not only survived, it had thrived. It had regained strength, independence, and confidence, and it had formed an unbreakable bond with a human who had dedicated months of care, patience, and love to its recovery. The mechanic realized that this journey had changed both of them. The dragon had recovered physically, emotionally, and mentally, while he had discovered resilience, patience, and the profound satisfaction of nurturing life. Their relationship was no longer one of caretaker and dependent. It was one of companionship, mutual trust, and shared experience. The bond they had formed could never be broken. Even as the dragon prepared to reclaim its life beyond the workshop dot in the following days, the mechanic allowed the dragon to explore larger areas outside the workshop. It moved with confidence, tested its wings, and even ventured briefly into open space within the station. Each exploration was measured, safe, and observed, but the dragon's growing independence was evident. It was no longer timid, fearful, or hesitant. Instead, it approached each new experience with curiosity, intelligence, and a quiet confidence, born of months of careful care and trust. Eventually, the day came for the dragon to leave the workshop entirely. The mechanic prepared a safe area outside, allowing it to stretch its wings fully and move freely. The creature paused, turning its eyes toward him, as if acknowledging the journey they had shared. Then, with a powerful leap and a few strong flaps, it took to the air, soaring gracefully across the open space. The mechanic watched, overwhelmed by emotion, as the dragon's flight became a symbol of everything they had achieved together: resilience, trust, healing, and freedom. Even as it flew, the bond remained. The dragon returned occasionally, circling the workshop, landing nearby, and interacting with the mechanic in quiet gestures of recognition and affection. Their connection had been forged through months of care, struggle, and understanding, and it endured beyond the physical confines of the workshop. The mechanic knew that the dragon's journey was now its own, but their shared history and trust would remain unbroken. In the end, the dragon's recovery was complete. From a paralyzed, abandoned creature left on a broken ship, it had become strong, independent, and full of life. The mechanic had played a pivotal role, not only restoring its body, but nurturing its mind, spirit, and confidence. Together, they had demonstrated the power of patience, care, and trust, showing that even